What really happened to lizard lick towing? Where is the crew now? There are shows that people watch once and forget. Then there are shows that get under your skin. Lizard lick towing was the second kind. It was loud, it was chaotic, and it was completely impossible to look away from. Repossessions that turned into brawls. Confrontations that looked like they could explode at any second. Personalities so big they practically burst through the screen. And then, without any real warning, it was simply gone. The cameras went off. The crew faded from the spotlight. Fans were left with nothing but reruns and questions. But behind that quiet ending was a real story full of grief, faith, reinvention, and a family that refused to stop moving forward no matter what came for them. So what really happened to lizard lick towing, and where is everyone now? Let's get into it. Lizard lick towing ran on True TV between 2011 and 2014 and became one of the most talked about reality programs of that era. At its peak, the show pulled in about 2.7 million viewers every week, making it one of the most successful programs on the network at the time. Distractify It followed Ron and Amy Shirley and their towing and repossession company out of rural North Carolina, and what made it pop wasn't the job itself, it was the people doing it. Ron was loud, bold, and fearless. Amy was tough, direct, and absolutely not someone you wanted to argue with. Together, they made every episode feel like something unexpected was always one breath away from happening. But the show wasn't purely unscripted. It was described as actuality television, meaning the business and the people were real, but the way situations were shaped and presented was heavily influenced by producers. People who actually worked in the towing and repossession industry spoke out, explaining that real repo work is generally much more controlled and procedural than what appeared on screen. Took news over time, as audiences became more media savvy, that gap between perception and reality began to erode the show's grip on viewers. The energy around it slowly faded, ratings dropped, and when Bobby Brantley, the third pillar of the show's personality, stepped back, something fundamental was missing. The show didn't end in a scandal or a dramatic finale. It simply stopped, a quiet ending of the kind that happens when something gradually runs its course. Took news. But before the cameras ever arrived, there was already a real story in motion. Ron opened Lizard Lick Towing in 1998 with a single truck, and with Amy's help, it grew over a decade into a successful company with a staff of 15 and a fleet of 20 trucks. TV Guide: the show didn't create what they had. It just turned a spotlight on it. And when that spotlight went away, the business kept running. That's the thing people forget. The show ending didn't mean the Shirleys were done. As the president of the company, Ron continued overseeing day-to-day operations and heading up the repossession skip tracing department, while Amy remained the vice president and backbone of the business. Net worth post: they didn't chase another television deal or try to manufacture a comeback. They simply kept working, the same way they always had. Lizard Lick Towing also built a TikTok following of more than 1 million people, where Ron, Amy, and their family share updates and moments that keep longtime fans connected to their world. Distractify Television faded, but the relationship with their audience didn't. Ron's path after the show also took a deeply personal turn. He has been serving as the ordained pastor of Dirt Church, Eastern Chapter, a grassroots ministry that blends blue-collar camaraderie with faith, gathering gearheads and community members for raw, tent-style revival services. Vibro Media: he has used his platform to reach children who are victims of sexual abuse and people battling addiction, and he has described his mission simply: stopping in fields, homes, and workplaces to bring people back, one at a time. CBN: the man who was once famous for loud confrontations on television is now devoting his energy to quietly rebuilding broken lives. That contrast says everything about who Ron Shirley actually is beneath the TV persona. Amy's story is equally layered. A professional powerlifter who holds 27 records in the sport, a former MMA competitor, and a licensed mortician, Amy has remained the vice president of Lizard Lick Towing and Recovery. Took news: she is also a published author, having released her cookbook, Gluten-Free and Lizard Lick, in 2015. Took news: but beyond the titles and achievements, Amy has also had to carry something far heavier than any of that. In February 2022, the family experienced a tragedy that shook everything. On February 17, 2022, Ron's son Harley Alexander Shirley, just 21 years old, was shot and killed in Garner, North Carolina. The shooting took place following a memorial balloon release event, and another person at the scene, a 20-year-old woman named Sophie Hagee, was paralyzed in the incident. Distractify authorities arrested a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old and charged them with murder and attempted murder, while others were charged as accessories to the crime. Distractify Ron responded publicly with grief but also with faith. In a post, he wrote that Harley was at peace now, waiting on the rest of us to arrive at those gates, and he called on his family and followers to remain hopeful. The cinemaholic, that is not a small thing. To lose a child in an act of violence and still choose to speak publicly with grace and forward momentum, that is a kind of strength that has nothing to do with television. In the years since, Ron has channeled that pain into purpose, speaking to young people about violence and the weight of bad decisions, using his own story not as entertainment but as a warning and a lifeline. The loud man from the Repo Show became something quieter and more important, a voice for healing in communities that desperately need it. Now, what about the rest of the crew? Bobby Bradley left Lizard Lick Towing after the show ended, briefly appeared in a short film called The Lonesome Curse, and then stepped back significantly from public life. The cinemaholic in 2019, he was diagnosed with pituitary adenoma, a form of brain tumor, and after surgery to remove it, he moved to his farm in Pilot, North Carolina, with his wife and their 8 children to focus on recovery. The cinemaholic, despite that health battle, Bobby has remained connected to his castmates. He appeared alongside Crazy Dave at a Missiles for Christ Ministry vehicle exhibition at King's Auto Corner, and together they hosted live fan video chats under the name Bad Dog Nation. Meow. Crazy Dave, whose real name is David, has continued pursuing his love of music from Rocky Cross, North Carolina, working on a musical initiative called the Rocky Cross Project and performing locally. Meow, he found a different creative lane, and it suits him. Big Juicy, whose real name is Elaine McGillivray, stepped back from the spotlight and focused on raising her family and keeping her personal life private. Tuco News' cousin Johnny disappeared from public view almost entirely, with no social media presence and no updates, a full and deliberate break from that chapter of his life. Tuco News' Swirly Earl has stayed closest to what he knows, remaining part of the Lizard Lick Towing team as one of the company's active drivers. Net worth post. What's remarkable, looking at all of this together, is how different each path turned out to be, and yet how the core of the story remained consistent throughout. The Shirleys built something real long before any camera crew showed up. They survived the show's rise, its manufactured drama, its quiet cancellation, and then something far more painful than any of that. The business is still operating, still working the roads of North Carolina, still doing the same work it has always done. Winch hubs, that's not nothing. In a world where reality TV chews people up and leaves them with nothing, Ron and Amy Shirley walked away with everything that actually mattered still intact. The legacy of Lizard Lick Towing is complicated. It was a show that turned a real profession into entertainment, that pushed real people into exaggerated situations, and that eventually ran out of road the way most reality shows do. But the people it featured were always more than the roles they played on screen. Ron Shirley is a pastor and a grieving father who chose purpose over bitterness. Amy Shirley is a businesswoman, an author, and a woman who has kept her family moving even through unimaginable loss. Bobby Bradley is a survivor in every sense of the word. And all of them found ways to keep going when the cameras stopped and real life, with all its weight, took center stage. That's the story worth telling. Not just the chaos and the repo runs, but what came after. What do you think about where the Lizard Lick Towing crew ended up? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story worth watching, hit like and subscribe and tap the next video on your screen for more stories just like this one.